U.S. climate envoy John Kerry has met with Pope Francis, the first official to have a private audience with him since his discharge from hospital. Mr. Kerry says that he found the pontiff in great spirits and in great form. The 86-year-old had left Rome's Gemelli Hospital on Friday, 9 days after surgery to repair an abdominal hernia. In 2015, Pope Francis wrote a landmark encyclical, the highest form of papal writing, on the need to protect the environment, combat climate change and reduce use of fossil fuels. Mr. Kerry will be having a series of meetings ahead of COP28, the latest UN climate summit that's to be held at the end of this year in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates.
He was in great spirits and great form. You really wouldn't have had any sense that he had been away in the hospital. I was really amazed. And he embraced a lot of conversation, and it was a nice meeting. I found the Pope to be, very much the Pope that I had the privilege of seeing several times over the last years. He was strong, he was clear, he seemed in very good form and good spirits.
Meanwhile, the world's two biggest greenhouses gas emitters, the United States and China, must create a partnership on tackling climate change without allowing bilateral differences on other issues to get in the way. U.S. climate envoy John Kerry made this known just in front of St. Peter's Square after he met Pope Francis. The former U.S. Secretary of State says he's keen to meet with the current holder of that office, Antony Blinken, to help determine when Mr. Kerry will go to China for talks on averting a global climate change crisis. Mr. Kerry confirmed that he has been invited to visit in the near term, but no date has been decided.
No, there's no conditionality with respect to we're talking about the things we very much hope China will be able to do, and together with us. We have to create a partnership here. China and the United States are the two largest emitters in the world. We're now moving, thanks to President Biden, in a very significant way. He has signed historic legislation into effect. It's having an impact already. And I think that over the course of the next months, hopefully, China-U.S. cooperation on this not bilateral but global issue.
And still ahead on the program, mass shooting at Juneteenth celebration in Illinois, at least one person killed. Do join us again. At least one person has been killed and over 20 injured at a Juneteenth celebration outside Chicago shortly after midnight on Sunday. Eyewitness footage shows the aftermath of the shooting incident with heavy police presence at the scene. Authorities say the celebration attracted a large group of people that had gathered at a parking lot in Willowbrook, Illinois, 39 kilometers outside of Chicago. The sheriff's deputy chief, Eric Swanson, said authorities are still investigating the motive and number of shooters involved. Juneteenth is a U.S. federal holiday commemorating the emancipation of enslaved Black Americans.
So I was laying in bed and then I heard a helicopter go overhead, and then my mom knocked on the door and was like, "What is going on outside?" So then I got up and looked out the window, and it was just chaos. There were sirens coming from like every direction. There was just hundreds of cop cars from all the way at the light at 91st, just down here. It was just a lot. It's more so that everyone just kind of gathers in the parking lot and usually has like a party or something, or they'll tailgate, and,
Last year we were told that they were going to do everything they could to prevent this from happening again, because it happens like last few years, like every Juneteenth celebration, and then like 4th of July, sometimes it happens. It's just a gathering place, and I said, with this liquor store here in the parking lot, I'm really concerned that this is going to turn ugly one of these days. Somebody's just going to, start smashing windows, and they said basically there wasn't much they can do.
And for many who do not know, the 19th of June is regarded as Juneteenth amongst African Americans, as it represents the day slavery was abolished in 1865 in Texas by Union General Gordon Granger after the Civil War. President Abraham Lincoln had on January 1st, 1863, declared freedom for enslaved people in Confederate states. However, it took over 2 years for the news to reach enslaved African Americans in Galveston, Texas. Current U.S. President Joe Biden signed legislation in 2021 making Juneteenth, that's today, a federal holiday after interest in the day was renewed during the summer of 2020 and nationwide protests that followed the police killings of Black Americans, including George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Well, let's get more on this. Washington correspondent Maria Bird was at the celebration at the White House on Sunday. She joins us now to talk about it, as well as the significance of the day. Maria, great to talk to you today.
Great to speak with you as well.
So
Happy Juneteenth.
Yes, you had a great time at the White House last night. The celebration was marred somewhat, by that story that we just told. But tell us about the celebrations, though, in other parts of the country.
Yeah, so the White House, for the first time ever since the holiday has become official, hosted a Juneteenth celebration. And this celebration was one of the largest you would see of African Americans being able to celebrate a historical day in American history that has not been recognized until very recently. Those who may not be as aware, the U.S. Slaves were emancipated in 1863, but unfortunately, some slaves did not receive the message, were not able to be free until 1865. So Juneteenth recognizes the day in which those slaves who were still enslaved after the Emancipation Proclamation were finally set free in Galveston, Texas.
And what does it mean, for African Americans today, and what are they gleaning from their history to make the day more significant?
This is a day that was not a part of American history 20 years ago, or a part of the celebratory nature of American history. I think African Americans were a bit conflicted very early on about celebrating the Day of Freedom. But most recently, the idea, as you mentioned, the ideas behind what many African Americans have witnessed and experienced as a result of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others, and some of the racial injustice and unrest that has been going through the U.S. For the last few years. I think this is an opportunity for Americans to understand their history, to be able to celebrate the Day of Freedom, but most importantly, to reconcile the fact that there's still a lot more work to be done and that the U.S. is still battling with racial injustice.
And you being, Black American, Maria, just explain to us the history of the day and why the attack in Illinois goes against its very significance.
It goes completely against what the day stands for. There is a woman that the mother of Juneteenth, that's a little over 96 years old at this point, and she and others have fought very hard to ensure that African Americans have the rights for all the freedom and justice that we've obviously been watching over the last few years, and voter rights act and so many others. And so when you think of these type of horrific events where you look at people being killed and harmed as a result of gun violence, it does not commemorate the day in the way in which I believe that many of those who fought very hard for this day to be recognized would want it to be.
So let's just digress a little bit to talk about the meeting between the Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. What were the main talking points, and what does it mean for China-U.S. relations going forward now?
This is a big moment, I think, for U.S. foreign relations, but specifically the moment for U.S. and China. We know that U.S. and China have been in somewhat of an unstable situation for quite a few years now, even preceding the Biden administration. But Secretary of State Blinken is the first Secretary of State in 5 years to visit and to have this type of this talk that he has stated earlier today was very successful. He believes that there is on the road to stabilizing the relationship between U.S. and China, and most importantly, opening the lines of communication to be able to understand one another so that the economic components that I believe both countries are suffering from can become stable, and also that the relationship can get back on track. So I think he's very hopeful of the future of the U.S.-China relations.
Right, Maria, thank you for the updates on those stories. Let's move on. 9 Egyptian nationals suspected of involvement in the sinking of a trawler carrying hundreds of migrants off the Greek coast last week have pleaded not guilty after appearing in court today. The men were arrested on suspicion of people smuggling and other offences following the disaster, which saw at least 78 people killed. Hundreds more are still missing at sea. The suspects will be back in court on Tuesday when it will be decided whether they will remain in jail until the start of the trial. It comes as the Greek authorities continue to face questions about whether they did enough to prevent the tragedy. And at least 4 migrants have been taken to hospital in Gran Canaria after Coast Guards rescued 53 of them on Monday as they tried to reach Spain in a wooden boat. Wrapped in blankets and showing signs of exhaustion, the migrants were attended by emergency services at Arguiguin port in island of Gran Canaria. The migrants of African origin included 50 men and 3 women. Authorities say they were picked up 5 miles off Gran Canaria Island. Interior Ministry figures show 10,348 migrants have reached Spain by sea, including the Canary Islands off the African coast up to 15th June, a 15% increase over the same period in 2022. According to Spain's Walking Borders charity, 2,390 people lost their lives trying to reach Spain, primarily by sea, in 2022. A policeman has died from his wounds after being stabbed near the Brazilian embassy in Tunis. There was heavy police presence in the area where the location had to be cordoned off. However, a ministry official said the 53-year-old attacker was mentally ill and the stabbing is not being treated as terrorism. The UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk is calling for greater political support for his office as he seeks to expand its work by establishing a first-time presence in China and India. The UN Rights Office has a presence in 95 countries, while there was no immediate reaction from Beijing or New Delhi to Turk's assertion. Setting up in China might prove difficult since a trip there by his predecessor, Michelle Bachelet, in 2022 was discussed for years. Mr. Volker Turk, who took over as High Commissioner late last year, said he would like to double his office's budget to step up global monitoring.
The system overall faces a significant lack of cooperation from its state parties. Only 37 states or regional organizations are currently up to date with all their reporting requirements to the treaty bodies. A total of 601 reports by states are overdue. Reports by 78 states have been overdue for more than 10 years. We need to double the budget of the office in the coming years to achieve these goals. We also need greater political support. There should ultimately be a human rights office in all countries to provide support, but also to learn from each country's experience in advancing human rights. A strong UN Human Rights Office and a healthy, well-resourced human rights ecosystems are a global public good, especially in these turbulent times.
Well, talking about rights, United Nations expert says the Taliban's treatment of Afghan women and girls could amount to gender apartheid as their rights continue to be gravely infringed upon by the country's de facto authorities. In a report covering July to December 2022, UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, Richard Bernay, found in March that the Taliban's treatment of women and girls may amount to gender persecution, a crime against humanity. The Taliban seized power in August 2021, drastically curtailing women's freedom and rights, including their ability to attend high school and university.
Grave, systematic and institutionalized discrimination against women and girls is at the heart of Taliban ideology and rule, which also gives rise to concerns that they may be responsible for gender apartheid, a serious human rights violation which, although not yet explicitly an international crime, requires further study. we have more specifically outlined issues of gender persecution in the report, and we have pointed to the need for more exploration of gender apartheid, which is not currently an international crime, but could become so. And we have noted that it appears if one applies the definition of apartheid, which at the moment is for race, to the situation in Afghanistan and use sex instead of race, then there seem to be strong indications pointing towards that.
Still ahead on The World Today. A floating piano concert captivates Madrid audience in Spain. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. Life is set to be returning to normal in many parts of the Sudanese capital following a 72-hour ceasefire agreed by the Sudanese Armed Forces and the rival Rapid Support Forces. The ceasefire began at 6 a.m. local time on Sunday, and in the hours leading up to it, fighting was still ongoing, fiercely in fact, in the capital Khartoum and in the greater capital area comprising Khartoum, Omdurman and Khartoum North, as well as North Kordofan and Darfur. At least 17 civilians, including 5 children, women and elderly people, were killed. 25 homes were destroyed on Saturday in an airstrike in South Khartoum, according to the Health Ministry. Several previous truces have failed to stop the fighting. The Health Ministry also says that more than 3,000 people have been killed and 6,000 injured since the conflict erupted. Only half of 130 hospitals in Khartoum are still in operation, and all hospitals in West Darfur are said to be out of service. Meanwhile, armed militants are said to have looted the residence of the Tunisian ambassador to Sudan, Shafiq Hachi. A statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs reported this, saying that they took his belongings in clear violation of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations and a violation of respect for the buildings belonging to diplomatic missions. The ministry has called for the perpetrators to be tracked down and held accountable and called for restraints and an immediate end to the fighting in Sudan, which began 2 months ago. The Tunisian ambassador's residence is not the only diplomatic building to have been affected by the fighting in Sudan. So have the Qatari, Kuwaiti, Libyan, Jordanian and Oman embassies. And 5 Palestinians, including a 15-year-old boy, have been killed by Israeli forces during a raid into Jenin refugee camp. Palestinian health officials have confirmed this. An Israeli helicopter fired missiles after Palestinian militants targeted troop carriers with explosives. It marks a sharp escalation of fighting as frequent raids in the city in the occupied West Bank continue. The Israeli army says several vehicles remain stuck amid a logistical operation under fire to remove them. According to the army, 7 Israeli soldiers and border police officers have been wounded, 3 of them moderately. Global aerospace and defense companies are touting cleaner transport and robotic weapons of the future as they also tackled urgent supply bottlenecks at a Paris air show on Monday. The air show is taking place under the shadow of the climate fears and a war economy. The world's largest aviation trade show, which alternates with Farnborough in the UK, returned to Le Bourget for the first time in 4 years after the pandemic forced the 2021 edition to be cancelled. Analysts say aerospace companies go into the biennial event with growing demand expectations as airlines rush for capacity to meet demand and help reach industry goals of net zero emissions by 2050.
The Paris Air Show is the most important air show, trade show in the world, very clearly that now. Historically, last couple of years, it's been really focused on civil aerospace. Air shows are dominated by civil aircraft orders. We should expect to see many hundreds of aircraft ordered this show this week. But what's changed has been the importance of defence. Defence has come back as a consequence of the war in Ukraine, and announcements about defence and companies presenting the equipment that they have for the defence market. The only way that the aviation industry can currently see to get to net zero by 2050, which is the target, is massive increase in the production of and the use of SAF. The question is that actually going to be enough? And is that going to be politically acceptable? SAF still produces emissions, particularly carbon dioxide, when it's burnt. And the idea that that will be an acceptable outcome, a decade's time, let alone 2 decades' time, I really doubt that. But that's all the industry has got, apart from getting a bit more efficient.
I think it can be the flair of sustainable aviation, but for that we need to ask ourselves the right questions. We cannot just look at the technologies to decarbonize aviation. We need to look at the energy demand. We need to look at how much we're able to produce. And the more aircraft you sell, the more the energy needs. In 2050, if the aviation sector continues to grow in the way it has over the last decades, you would need 25% of the total European electricity production to go to aviation. And that's a huge number. It's quite unrealistic to think that's possible.
Meanwhile, environmental concerns and hopes for the planet take centre stage in a new art exhibition opening this week at London's Hayward Gallery. Dear Earth, Art and Hope in a Time of Crisis sees the works of more than a dozen artists and show responding to the effects of climate change. The exhibition is inspired by Nigerian-born artist Otobong Nkanga's suggestion of caring is a form of resistance, and her work, including the trifurcation, the roots of a naturally fallen chestnut tree interwoven with ropes linking 3 glass biospheres, is also on display.
This exhibition is called Dear Earth, Art and Hope in a Time of Crisis. And the premise was up to ask artists to reframe, recontextualise the climate change today and connect to Mother Earth, our Earth. Drawings, paintings, installation, music, embroidery, huge sculptures, a living sculpture of pyramid of flowers, which Agnes Dennis has done, and outside eyes of extinct birds. So it's very much about fauna, animals, people, and our world today. All the past shows and the shows that are coming are very important to tackle these issues. This exhibition takes a slightly different route. It becomes a more emotional, caring response, a personal response, like Dear Earth, for example. We're trying to fall back in love with our planet as a relative, to connect that we have compassion for the animals that are dying. So I think this show slightly offers a compassionate, hopeful way forward. That, like I say, we do not shy away from those issues, but we're offering people to not look at the hard facts, but maybe look at behavioural change, maybe look at artistic ways forward.
And we end the program with some music. French pianist Violette Cravas entertained hundreds of Madrid residents who gathered around Pradolongo Artificial Lake to watch her performance on a floating piano. The group Piano du Lac captivated locals and tourists in the working-class neighborhood of Usera with a revamped concert. With an amazing sunset ahead of the summer season, the pianist played classical and contemporary music and asked the audience to immerse themselves, as there was no fourth wall as there's normally in theatres. The group is on tour in Spain until August, but this was the only stop in central Madrid. I was entertained too. Well, that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jackie Rogers. Bye for now.